All right, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to our GreenHomeNYC monthly forum for March this year. We're going to be talking about electric vehicles in New York City. It's a very exciting topic. You've probably seen the attention around this topic earlier this week. There was an article in the New York Times, an article in the Gothamist, and generally a lot of questions, a lot of excitement on this topic. So we're very proud to have great speakers for you today. We have Mark Simon from the Department of Transportation with the City of New York, who leads the EV policy team. We have Britt Reichborn, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who's a section manager at Con Edison, and she leads the electrical vehicle programs. Then we have Tobias Lesch, who's the head of EV infrastructure and energy at Revels. So I have a couple of slides about GreenHomeNYC, and then we'll dive into the presentations. In case you are not aware, GreenHomeNYC is a volunteer-run nonprofit organization. We've been around for almost 15 years now, or almost 20 years now, and our mission is to promote a sustainable built environment. We really focus on educating the broad public about sustainability issues, and we do that through 3 different programs that are all managed by our volunteers. First program is called Green Careers. It's a monthly program where we talk about ways to get into the sustainability industry. And we often have speakers come in and explain how they developed their career in sustainability. We also have a resume workshop and a Zoom interview workshop. So trying to get as many people up to speed on what's going on in the sustainability industry and how they can get involved, whether they have a technical background or not. So that's Green Careers. And we have our monthly forums. You're attending one today. We touch on topics that are specific to the sustainability industry. Generally, we bring experts from the field who come and share knowledge around those topics. Today, we're going to be talking about the deployment of electrical vehicles and the infrastructure needed in New York City, but we'll have topics around politics. We usually talk about broad sustainability topics, green fashion, what's going on with urban farming, those sorts of broad sustainability topics, and we want to make sure everyone knows what's going on in New York City. So that's our monthly forums, and then our last program is tours, and we're really excited to bring in-person tours again this year. So we actually have a tour of a solar array planned for April. Those happen every few months. So the best way to keep up to speed on what's going on is to follow us on social media and to read our newsletter. We are also always looking for volunteers. As I said, we're a volunteer-run organization. We don't have any paid staff, which means that if you are interested in getting involved, we'll use any skills that you have, whether it's on the social media side of things. We need help with video editing, with planning events, with writing the blog. So everything that needs to be done to run an organization, we need help. If you're interested, you can scan the QR code here on the right, or you can attend our next volunteer session, which is every month on the 3rd Wednesday of the month, right before the monthly forum. And you can sign up for that on our website. And one quick clarification before we dive into the event, we're going to be doing Q&A at the end of the session. So first we'll have Mark from the DOT speak, then we'll go to Tobias, and we'll end with Britt from Con Edison. Throughout the presentations, if you could enter your questions in the chat box, please make sure to mute yourself. And at the end of the 3 presentations, we will be covering the questions, and one of our moderators will be asking those questions to the speakers. So that's how we'll get the questions to them. All right, I will now stop sharing my screen, and I will give the lead to Mark to start with what is going on at the DOT and what can we look forward to coming from the city.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. As said, Mark Simon with the New York City Department of Transportation. And I'm going to buzz through this presentation fairly quickly because I believe this topic is just perfect for a dialogue session. So we'll give you a little bit of background on EV charging and why some of the articles we may or may not disagree with that have come out in the last few days. But here we go. So infrastructure in New York City. EV charging, it's an entire ecosystem that we will need to make New York City ready. And that is going to involve fast charging, curbside charging, and we are going to be focusing on electrification of private vehicles and freight delivery. You're going to probably hear different numbers throughout this evening, and the numbers may vary, but the bottom line is we need thousands of charge points. And DC charging, fast charging, workplace charging, curbside charging, garage charging, box store charging, gasoline station charging. We're going to need every bit of it. And you know, New York City is committed to make this possible. And you know what our role will be is we're still exploring that, but it could be owning charging, it could be making land available for charging, it could be development of helpful local laws, development of public-private partnerships, you know, changing zoning. You know, we want to work to figure out how most efficiently to get this done. So diving a little more into that, you know, what is this ecosystem in New York City? Now we start with home charging, which is the big part of the pyramid in most of the country. But in New York City, it's a little bit of a, you know, starved pyramid. 50% of, or our estimates are that 50% of the people can use a garage, driveway, or private parking facility to charge their vehicle. The remainder are parking on the street. So, you know, as you get into suburban areas and other places, single family homes, or even parts of Queens and Brooklyn where there's at least a driveway or a place to pull in, you know, a lot of people can start by charging at home. And we certainly, where we are now with electric vehicles, we can go a long way just starting with those home charging folks. Then there's workplace charging, which is for those that would drive to work, and work has dedicated parking. Now, in the rest of the country, you know, that's a lot of folks. Here, you know, it's not playing that big a role. Then we have curbside charging, parking, garage, and field charging. And we see that as more important here for those who don't have access to the home or work charging. And that is traditionally a slower speed charging, especially if you're going to be there for multiple hours. And then there's the DC fast charging for those who either need daily quick charging, like for hire vehicles or urban delivery trucks, or the kind of place where you need to go once a week to fill up, and maybe you're spending 20 to 45 minutes doing that. And we believe that, you know, charging needs to be optimized and tailored to the vehicle dwell time. So, you know, if you're a parking field where everyone's a commuter and they're staying there 10 hours, don't put in the DC charging, put in slower charging, that kind of idea. What needs to be done, you know, we issued a report last fall called Electrifying New York, and you know, it's from the city perspective. So we have GROW, the city operated fast charging network, which is our personal commitment to kind of start this in a small way around the city to 80 plugs by 2025, equip 20% of all spaces in our municipal parking lots and garages with level 2 chargers by 2025, increasing to 40% by 2030. And that number is, that's about 1,000 level 2 chargers that we have a goal to install in the next 3 years, which I just got to there. And well, that 1,000 charge points in addition on the curb, increasing to 10,000 by 2030. And I will state that these are, you know, in planning and still a lot of fine tuning is going to have to happen. We are also exploring a user supplied cord charging system that might integrate with existing street infrastructure. You'll find these in Europe, and certainly London's done a lot of this with street poles or other objects. You know, part of that is it's a lower cost solution to putting curbside chargers like the ones we've just been installing in. We're exploring that. We want to advocate for funding and supportive policies from the federal government, which are pretty good right now. Work with utilities and regulators to make it easier and cheaper to install EV chargers, and then stand back and let the private sector go at it. Then we want to engage with EV stakeholders to better understand the evolving EV market, technology, and charging needs. We want to kind of host an industry day and try to figure out, you know, how to fine tune city's efforts. And we believe there's a lot of need right now for increasing public awareness of EVs and charging opportunities. And we have a smallish New York City centric Plug NYC marketing program that at least we're kicking into gear, branding our stuff a little bit. You know, I talked about room for everybody, and electrifying New York is the current infrastructure, and I'll even admit my current plans to develop these starter hubs are really insignificant when you come up to what we're going to need in the next few years. But we feel that they're very important because they serve as an initial starting point. It's a place we're going to make sure that, you know, each borough gets some of these little charging hubs. We're working with our existing parking fields and garages, and we want to make sure that there's some limited availability everywhere. And you know, when the other folks, the Volvo to Starbucks, the Volta to Walgreens, Revel being a lifesaver right here, you know, Tesla, Electrify America, EV Go, you know, they're all out there, and will hopefully do much bigger work. So anyway, I wanted to show there's a modeling program called well, it's EVI. It's a pro light tool, and it's pretty crude, but you can tinker around with it. And I just ran this projection, which is, you know, we talk about having 400,000 EVs by some point. You know, we say 2030, but even whether it's 2030 or 2035, you know, assume 50% of the people have no home charging, like here in New York, and where we have plug-in hybrids, we're only going to support about half of them because we know they can run on gasoline. And then I threw in, well, what if this was the mix? So plug-in hybrids with 20-mile range, 10%, plug-in hybrids with 50-mile range, 10%, pure battery electrics in the lower range, 20%, and then the big guys, the 250+ mile runs 60%. And running that scenario, it says we would need 15,000 workplace chargers, which I interpret to mean also publicly available chargers, since we don't really have that kind of workplace. In addition to 9,000 public level 2s, forgive the extra zeros, and 3,600 DC fast chargers. So my little hubs have become a little dust bin, but so there is room for everybody to be in this. So, that's where we are. But let me just show you quickly, the kind of things we're starting with. And it's small, but we've learned a lot just doing these. So we're building hubs, and the first hubs we built have 3 50 kilowatt fast chargers, which are now not so fast by today's standards, and then one 150 kilowatt charger, which certainly in Manhattan, in our first site on Essex Street, is the only 150 kilowatt charger in Manhattan, as far as I know. And then we'll throw in some level 2 chargers, depending on how many are there. So what do those numbers mean? 50 kilowatts could hopefully get you about 100 miles of range in about 30 minutes. 150 kilowatts could give you 150 miles of range in about 15 minutes. And then the 6.6 to 7 kilowatts are about 25 miles of range per hour. So these recently opened September and November of last year. And that's what they look like. So how are we charging? What are we doing? In our case, we're charging customers 35 cents kilowatt hour, but we also have a paywall, and we felt that the paywall was a problem, or at least certainly not helpful. And so what we're doing is we're waiving the cost for the first hour of parking. So, in Delancey Street, that first hour costs $8. So we're not charging for the first 22 kilowatts of power when someone's plugging in. In Queens, it's $5, so it's 14 kilowatts. We've started with pretty light usage, but we are at least pleased that the trend is in the right direction. We're seeing utilization up. We're seeing the average stay up. There was a little bit of wonder at the beginning, as would they just stay long enough to get the free kilowatts, but now people are actually staying and filling their car and paying too. We are looking to create a discounted charging program for taxis and FHVs down the road, sort of a frequent user idea. So in addition to the 2 hubs I mentioned, which are Court Square, Queens, and Delancey, Essex, we are about to start construction on a site up in the Bronx on White Plains Road, and one in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, to get some of the outer borough coverage. Those will be completed hopefully in 2022, given the long lead times for charging equipment right now, and probably transformers. We have 3 more sites that are entering the contractual process, and we hope to begin construction in a few months on those. As I said, we're expecting long lead times on the fast chargers due to high demand, chip shortages, and the general world events. We have a phase 3, which involves possibly another 5 of our facilities, working with the New York Power Authority and their Evolve New York program. We are kind of trying to wrap up an agreement with them, with our lawyer-to-lawyer process. We are also, awaiting or working with New York State to figure out what percentage and where where charging will occur as part of the FHWA $5 billion, of which, you know, it's formula money, so a percentage has gone to New York State, and then there are going to be opportunities to compete for additional funds, and we plan to compete. We're also building a new big garage, which is going to be our showcase by Queensboro Hall. It's a new 600 space garage, and we're adding infrastructure in 2 phases. So at the onset of this garage in the next year, we'll have 31 level 2s and 3 75 kilowatt chargers. And then we're going to expand that. We have plans for another 90 level 2s and at least 4 more fast chargers, probably in the between 75s and 150 kilowatts. Curbside charging. I am sure some of you have run into them. They're still few and far between. And this is a project that Con Edison and DOT have been working jointly on. This is Con Edison funded project to evaluate curbside charging in New York City. So we have plans for 120 charging locations, 100 of them for the public and 20 that would be geared for city vehicles. And we're at 86 of the 100 are active right now on the public side, and 12 of the 20 city ones are installed. As you can see, we've got a few sites where utilization is quite impressive on the west side of Manhattan and Brooklyn, downtown Brooklyn and Prospect Park area. As you can see, 40 to 50% utilization rates. But we have a number of other sites where it's much lower, and we're also going site by site trying to solve problems with icing, double parking, getting them free to be used as chargers. As you look at the bottom shot on the screen there, we've had some creative solutions by EV drivers, but they are not what we want to be encouraging. But if you can't quite see that, someone is parked on the sidewalk charging because the parking space was used by a gas guzzling car. So anyway, as of the end of January, we've already issued 890 tickets to try to encourage people to leave these for EV charging. And it's a no standing zone ticket. So I believe that's $110. So, this is a 4-year demonstration, and we certainly believe that the curb is very likely going to play a major role in some way or manner, and this is an exciting first step. So with that, I will hand this back. And I thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. That was fascinating. Those numbers are really crazy. So
aren't they?
Yeah, it's good to see the goal that we're working towards.
Yeah.
A light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you for that, Mark. Tobias, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here and present a little bit more about what Revels doing and talk a little bit more about EV charging in New York City. So just as a quick 101, I know Mark went over some of this, but want to just talk a little bit more about what is charging. And there's several different kinds of charging. On the far left, you hear these things: level 1, level 2, fast charging, slow charging. What does that actually mean? On the far left, you have level 1 charging, which is basically plugging into the normal outlet you have in your house. That's really not practical It takes 50, 100 hours to charge your car. So unless you're leaving the car all week and not going to use it, unless you're using it only on the weekends, it's probably not realistic. So really emergency only. People run out of juice, and that's the only place that they can charge. They have level 2 chargers. This is what another part of slow charging. It's 5 to 10 hours to charge your vehicle. These make sense for overnight charging predominantly, maybe some workplace charging, but really that's like what you want to install in your home. When you get to the fast charging section, so these are much more expensive equipment, big equipment, and they can charge your vehicle very rapidly. However, there's a big spectrum of fast charging. So as Mark said, the 50 kilowatts, that's basically the slowest fast chargers that are out there. They're becoming a little bit outdated. I would call them legacy fast charging. Really, these make sense for fleets. Sometimes they could work for public use, but people are looking for a faster charge. And through all the research we've done and just evidence from having our own charging site, people are looking for the 150 to 350 kW charging speeds, and that means you can get a charge in 10 to 20 minutes. So it's really making owning an electric vehicle similar to owning a gasoline vehicle in terms of recharging it. Sure, 20 minutes is longer than 5 minutes, but it's a lot better than an hour, and it's definitely better than waiting around 5 to 10 hours to make sure your car is charged. What we're focused on at Revel is really the ultra fast 150 kW plus charging stations, because this is what we think is required for a city like New York, where there's just, everyone parks on the street. Real estate's very expensive. So putting level 2 chargers in parking garages, it's complicated. There's a lot of those places are valet. That's not necessarily accessible to all income groups. So we really think that to get mass EV adoption in the city, you need to go with ultra fast charging and basically building electric gas stations out. Current state of EV charging in New York. It is lacking. So here I have color coded. The black stalls are free to access and you can go charge. But many of these stalls are small, where they have 2 to 3 chargers. Sometimes that means that an ICE vehicle is parked there, or the charger's not working. So it's really hard to get a reliable charge session when a station has 2 to 3 chargers. Someone might be using it. Imagine pulling up to a gas station with your gas car. They have 2 pumps and one is broken and the other one's occupied. It's really a very frustrating experience. But now imagine that there's only a handful of gas stations in your city. So owning an EV is very difficult right now in New York. There are also a lot of fast charge, or 16 fast chargers that are behind paywalls. So you have to pay the parking fee to enter, and then you pay to charge. We don't think that that's really the future of EV charging either. We think that the future is no paywall, and we want big stations that can deliver a very quick charge session. So from our math here, there's only 2 stations that check that box in terms of this is going to work in the future for EV charging. That is at JFK, they have 10 chargers in the cell phone waiting lot. Those get a lot of usage from Uber and Lyft and TNC drivers and taxis. And then Revels station, which is in Bed-Stuy. This is the largest fast charging station in North America. We have 25 fast chargers there. And the experience that we've heard from individuals so far is like, the fact that you have chargers at work and they're unoccupied is amazing. And like, they are so happy. And that is such a low bar. We want to deliver a much better experience than that. But the experience right now is chargers don't work, can't find a place to charge, stalls occupied. So just having a large station with a lot of chargers really totally changes that experience and changes the calculus for people to buy EVs. What is required by 2030? And Mark had some interesting numbers. There's a lot of people out here, different numbers all over the place. The one that I look towards is really the ICCT. So this is International Council on Clean Transportation. They have done some really good analysis of city-specific EV adoption rates. Because New York's going to have a different EV adoption rate than Los Angeles, which have a different adoption rate than Dallas, or just the country as a whole. Like there's different factors that go into who's buying EVs and where they're buying them. So anything city specific is hard to come by, but ICCT has done an interesting study here, and they think we need 13,000 or more fast charging stalls, and that's assuming 50% of people have access to home charging in the New York area. That includes some, areas like parts of New Jersey and parts of Long Island. But our assumption is that 50% is actually probably pretty high. Even if somebody has a driveway, it doesn't mean they can install a level 2 there. It also doesn't mean that they're going to spend the money to install a level 2 there. So if you really think about what the reality is, we think that number is closer to 10 to 15% in the 5 boroughs is where people are going to have access to overnight at home charging. So that would increase this number of 13,000 up quite a bit. Another really interesting study is by NREL, so that's National Research Energy Labs, is part of the federal government, and they have done a study specifically on what is required to electrify rideshare and taxi vehicles in New York City. They say that you need 1,300 fast charging stalls for the electrification of that business. And that assumes, again, 40% of drivers have access to home charging. We think that number is lower. So the takeaway from this is there's a lot of fast charging that needs to be built out in New York. And right now we have 50. So if you say the numbers between 10,000 and 20,000, I don't know what that end up number will be. We're nowhere near to that. And if we're going to have this done by 2030, we really got to get going now. So major challenges for EV adoption and building out charging stations. Why are there only 50? So just to start off here is the grid in New York is very congested. And it's also, the amount of power you need for some of these stations is the equivalent to a skyscraper. So you can't just go to a parking lot or an old gas station or a site and say, hey, we want to build a beautiful fast charging station here. It's not going to happen. And it may happen, but it may take 2-3 years where you have to build that out. And those are 2-3 years where, as a charging company, you have to pay rent on that site, and you can't even put a charger in the ground yet because you need to get the power upgraded, which requires upgrading the grid infrastructure in the area. So you have an infrastructure that's not set up for EV charging. You also just have the amount of power that's required for it is absolutely astronomical. And as you start building out more of these stations, you're going to have further and further problems where the grid gets continually more congested. You put a charging station here, well, okay, that is going to impact potentially upstream of that grid capacity. So it's going to be harder and harder to build these things out over time, just because the grid is going to get more and more congested. So this is one, major issue that I know is being worked on, but it's definitely a challenge, and we see that today as we start looking at new sites. Other challenges here there are soft costs that really impact the economics of these sites, and a lot of these soft costs probably don't necessarily need to be here. This is a visual from the Rocky Mountain Institute on the right-hand side, but just showing you that, okay, what do you think of a charging station? It's going to have chargers, there's going to be electrical equipment. Okay. Oh, actually, there's all these other things that you're going to have to pay for to build these out, which can cause major delays or just cost a lot of money. And either delay or costing a lot of money can make a site just not pencil out. So, soft costs, I can give you some examples of this. But if, for example, if I have to wait to get a permit from the city, or there's a zoning issue to build out a charging station, and that takes 6 to 12 months, this business is already hard enough. So having that delay just makes it so that somebody else with a use case for that site, whether they just want to park trucks there or they want to build something else there, they're more likely to get that site than we are as an EV developer, because there's hoops we have to jump through in order to acquire that site and make sure that we can get the permitting. And that just is it's just an impediment to development here. There are also zoning regulations which are outdated and not really amenable to widespread EV adoption. I can give you an example for that. So the use group for EV charging is a different use group than what is currently the use group for gas stations. So there are certain sites that are permitted or zoned for being a gas station. I can't build an EV charging station there. So like things like that are just, these are like silly things that we just need to work through and update so that we can build charging all over the city, because it's not something we just want to put in a couple neighborhoods. We need to have this everywhere if people are going to adopt EVs. Most importantly, it's really a chicken and egg dilemma that's delaying the build out of fast charging and EV charging in general. You basically, you start off with low EV adoption, right? So if I go build a site as a EV charging developer and open that site, there's not enough people to use it. So I'm going to have really low utilization of that site. I'm not going to be able to make enough money. So that means I'm not going to build out many other many other sites. And that then leads to people not buying EVs because they have nowhere to charge it. So it's this kind of vicious chicken or egg cycle that has to be broken, where we need charging in the ground so that people feel comfortable buying EVs. And then once people start buying EVs, these charging stations will start making money, which will mean more charging stations will be put across the city, leading to higher EV adoption. I think this is really the key here. And once this gets solved, a lot of the other problems, they're problems, but they're less large than this. Also, this chicken and egg problem is leading to build out of EV charging sites that are obsolete before they go in the ground, or they're already obsolete. So basically you have EV charging companies building out sites with 1 or 2 chargers. Why is that? Well, building out a site with 25 chargers is very expensive, and there's not enough EV adoption right now to support a large site like that. So you get a bunch of these 1 or 2 charging sites, which are just a terrible experience, as I explained before. And you can see here, this is a real site. This is in a Walgreens parking lot in Brooklyn, and you have a fast charger here, and you have a gas car blocking it. Then you have 2 EVs trying to squeeze in and charge. As Mark showed, also, like this happened with the curbside problem. If you put these charging stations in non-dedicated EV facilities, a lot of people end up parking in front of them. And it's just a terrible experience to own an EV, and you roll up to this, and this is what you have to deal with. Really what needs to happen is these dedicated EV fast charging sites have to be built out at a pretty fast clip to reach these levels of EV adoption that we want. So what I mean by, what do I mean by this? It's 10 stalls or more. You need 10, like you need gas stations with 1 or 2 pumps. Again, those could go a lot faster. You're going in 5 minutes, but those are pretty rare. You need to have scale to make this work. So you can see in the background, this is a picture of our super hub. We have 25 fast chargers. There's a bunch of cars charging here, but there's plenty of room for other people to come charge. And this is really what's needed to build out to get people to adopt EVs, is the reliable charge session. They need to be fast too. People don't want to wait an hour for their car to charge. They want to wait 20 minutes max. So that's really the speed we got to get to. And these have to be dedicated EV locations. Having a shared space with ICE vehicles, as I showed before, just creates issue. People take parking. Parking is a premium in the city, and reserving it for an EV vehicle, like on the road or in a shared mixed use facility, is just not going to work. Like maybe that works out in other places in America where you have these absolutely enormous parking lots and they're only half full, and you can make a very nice dedicated EV section in the back. But it's just not realistic in New York. And then, very importantly, no access fees. There's a bunch of Tesla chargers in Manhattan in parking garages. Oh, you have to pay $40 to go access the charger, and then you can pay for charging. No one wants to do that. They just want to roll up and charge and pay for the charging service, because they're not paying for parking, they're paying for charging. So you might ask, like, what is Revell actually doing to address these problems? First of all, we are going to put in over 1,000 universal charging stalls in the next 36 months. What I mean by universal is it can charge all types of EVs, so CCS plugs, but also providing adapters for people who have Tesla vehicles, so that all EVs are supported. We also want to make all these chargers 150 kW plus. Again, that's making it 20 minutes, 10 minutes to get your charge done. We also, the reliability situation of the fast chargers is horrendous right now. You guys can go on PlugShare, check it out, and just read about it. But across the country, this is a new technology and chargers are breaking. The only way to solve this is by having dedicated staff on the ground, fixing chargers every day, testing chargers every day, like we were doing at our first site. And we want to expand that across New York as we build out more sites. We want to be the most reliable charging network in the country with 99% uptime, so that when you roll up to the charger, you know it's going to work. Again, these dedicated EV super hubs with 10 to 50 stalls per location. We're building electric gas stations. And we want to put these everywhere, not just in affluent areas with higher EV adoption rates. We already noticed from putting our charging station in Bed-Stuy, in a economically disadvantaged community, people in the area are buying EVs, and some of them are not maybe buying a new EV. Those are expensive, but they're buying used EVs and they're charging there. It's also right. We've seen a lot of TNC drivers who have bought EVs because now they have a place to charge and they live in the area. But it's great that they can charge in the area that they live in. So these are some things that we're really focused on. And again, it's not just building these in Manhattan. We want to build them all across the city. To get this done, we have to have very close alignment with the state and local governments, the utility, Con Edison, and then other agencies across the city. It's going to take everyone's effort to figure out what are the barriers, what are the issues, and remove those barriers and issues so that we can actually make this transition to electric. I think also, just to add here, we really have a community first approach. We want to build these stations in communities that want them, and we want people's input while we're building these stations to make sure that it's serving the community as best as possible. How is Revell doing this? As I said, there's a chicken and egg problem. So if we built all these stations out and right now, there's not enough demand for them, we'd just be burning money. So the way we're doing this is by providing a rideshare service that's all electric in New York. That provides demand for our charging stations that are fully publicly accessible. And then we can open up more those publicly accessible fast charging stations allow people to buy EVs, which then means that we can open up more charging stations and have more people buy EVs. But we're really solving the chicken and egg problem by bringing demand to our charging stations from day one. So our current charging station in Brooklyn has already 15% utilization because we have our own vehicles charging there, plus the public charging there, plus other fleets charging there. And that is, national average is somewhere in the low single digits, like 2 to 3%. So the fact we have 15% at a huge charging hub is really proof that this model works. What we're trying to do is take this one super hub we've built and replicate that across the city to accelerate EV adoption in New York. Thank you all. Hope you enjoy the presentation and looking forward to the Q&A session.
Awesome. Thanks, Tobias. This was really great to see. And the blue really stands out. I actually walked by the hub by the Pfizer building, and it's really bright in the middle of the night. You can really see it, and it's impressive. So looking forward to having more of those all over the city. Britt, you are up. If you want to start sharing your screen, Tobias, go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and then Britt can take over.
Great, thank you so much.
All right.
There we go. Got it. Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. I am a section manager in the electric vehicles group at Con Edison. Most folks on the phone are probably aware that we provide electric service and some other commodities across New York City and to Westchester, the area north of the city, a little bit more suburban, a little less dense there. And when we think about our role in electric vehicle adoption, clearly a natural fit is going to be infrastructure, but we're also looking to push beyond that. And what I'm going to do is just start with this slide and talk for a bit about how we're approaching this transition, what we're doing to support it. You'll hear a lot of things that will resonate from what Mark and Tobias shared, partly because we do work closely with both of them. But essentially, I think there's a common theme here. We need the infrastructure. Without the infrastructure, the cars aren't going to come. And so there's a few different ways we can support that. You know, how can Con Edison help bring the infrastructure in that's going to drive this vehicle adoption? And what's really driving Con Edison to do this anyway? And sort of the larger context here is we have a lot of very ambitious goals on the policy side, and I won't try to rattle them off, partly because I almost lose track. There's the city goals and the state goals. They're really focused on the greenhouse gas reduction goals under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, but they really focus on light duty vehicle adoption. They focus on school buses electrifying and on medium and heavy duty vehicle adoption. And those policy targets are what drives our programs, what drives the incentive levels. And you can see here, we sort of break out what we're doing in 4 different areas. The first way to sort of tackle this chicken or egg problem that Tobias laid out is to provide financial support with upfront incentives. And today we have an incentive program. We supported the Revels station that you saw in Bedford-Stuyvesant. That's $250 million of incentives to go to customers to build out charging stations for light duty vehicles. In her State of the State address, Governor Hochul directed the Public Service Commission to expand that Make Ready program to medium and heavy duty vehicles. I'll talk a bit below what we're talking about when we talk about that kind of program, what the incentives cover. And 2021 was our first year operating the program at scale. And you can see here, we talk about the Revels Super Hub, as well as a number of level 2 and DCFC stations at other sites. So that helps cover the cost of actually installing the infrastructure. We know, second of all, operating these stations can be challenging. We know that they have their utility bills, they have networking costs. There's a lot of different costs that go with operating these stations. So we have 2 incentives on offer, and one of them in particular really focuses on incentivizing grid beneficial behavior. So not just providing financial support for operations, but also encouraging behavior that will ultimately reduce the costs of operating the grid for all customers. That's our Smart Charge New York program. There's a technology component to this, proving out or developing different technologies. We had a school bus vehicle to grid project that we're wrapping up in Westchester that transported kids for 3 years on 5 different buses in the White Plains School District. And after a lot of debugging and resolving issues in the technology, which is I think still, becoming really fully commercialized at this point. We performed a full summer vehicle to grid operations. We compared how the different buses fared in terms of their battery capacity and state of health under different discharge cycles. And we also completed the Curbside demonstration project that Mark talked about in partnership with New York City DOT. And finally, pushing beyond just offering the financial support, we're also starting to offer more in customer education. We are developing a fleet assessment service that provides support for fleets, both to understand what the charging capacity is like at their site. That site selection that Tobias talked about is a really key challenge for fleets that are trying to locate sites. And also, I'll talk a bit below about our charging cost calculator tool. So I'll start with the upfront incentives, and really
Hey,
this.
Britt, sorry to
The
interrupt.
slide, yeah.
I just really, we don't think that your slides are actually changing. So I actually will take over if
Okay.
you want to just stop sharing, and then
Sure.
I'll share.
Sure. So what I was putting up on slide 4 was a survey, and this is actually a national survey, so it's very telling. When you ask people, and these are private drivers, what's the key barrier to vehicle adoption? There's many factors that people might list, you know, different access to models, you know, sort of worrying about the cost of operating it, cost of maintenance, but the leading challenge nationally is access to charging and range anxiety. And that's only more pronounced in our dense urban territory. And because of this, Public Service Commission ordered the New York State Utilities to launch this Make Ready program. This is one of those upfront infrastructure incentive programs. And it's really that key step in addressing the chicken or egg problem. So if we can go to the next slide, you can see here sort of the scope of the program. We're looking to install 18,500 level 2, 457 DCFC fast chargers, with that about $250 million of incentives. And really what we see in terms of the sort of future of charging is a mix of solutions. Certainly curbside and public charging will play a role. The utilization of those curbside chargers that the DOT and Con Edison rolled out is actually quite high, even in the first year of operation. And, you know, with the low adoption rates, relatively low in the city, pretty impressive. There will be level 2 plugs at multifamily buildings. But we know there's only so many people that can access charging in their apartment building, or maybe a little bit further out from the urban core at their home. And so definitely those DC fast charging hubs that Tobias talked about are going to play a really key role in our territory. And in particular, what we're seeing is these larger hubs that he talked about. There's a viable business model because you can have base utilization for fleets, you're serving the public. And what we notice in our program applications is the larger hubs are overwhelmingly public, whereas the smaller ones tend to not be. And finally, one of the big policy priorities and also a focus for Con Edison is equitably bringing the benefits of transportation electrification to communities in New York City. Don't love the term, but this is sort of the standard term, disadvantaged communities. These are low to moderate income communities. These are communities with a history of environmental justice issues. And what we're finding is also these larger DC fast charging hubs, by serving ride sharing, ride hailing drivers, they're reaching those communities very directly. And also, the locations we're seeing for these hubs, they're not all in Manhattan, they're really spread all across the 5 boroughs. So this is sort of the scope of that incentive program. If we go to the next slide, you can see what the program covers. We provide incentives to customers to install the chargers on their properties. So anything that covers bringing the power to the charger. The program doesn't cover the charger itself, but it covers those grid upgrades that Tobias talked about that will be needed at sites that don't have adequate capacity, as well as the work on the customer property. And some of the utilities in California have actually moved into the space, and the utilities are actually owning and operating chargers. Our model is a pretty business as usual model. We own, operate, and build the infrastructure on the grid side of the meter, and everything downstream on the customer side, the customer chooses their contractor, they manage the construction, and they own and operate the infrastructure. And one sort of note is that while the overall impact on the grid in our very dense city isn't really extremely impactful today. This year, the EV charging is like 0.2% of the total grid peak power. And, that'll grow to maybe like 1% in 2025. It might get as high as 15% or even more by 2040. So it will grow. But what we find is the constraints we often have are at the service itself. And so that site selection is a really big part of what developers are focused on. We can move to the next slide. And to the next, thanks. So the other aspect of this is the operating costs. I talked about this a bit before. I'm not going to go through all the details on this slide, but you can see that through our Smart Charge New York program, we're incentivizing our customers to charge away from grid peak periods. So they get incentives for signing up to the program, and then they're getting paid for every kilowatt hour that they pull through those chargers into the vehicles during the off-peak period. And the idea here is, we recognize that the operating costs can be challenging. There's a lot of discussion about, should utilities change their rate structures? And we feel that, the rates, we want to be fair and consistent across all customers and have the rates really reflect the cost of operating the grid. But at the same time, recognizing that operating costs can be a challenge, we want to encourage customers to charge away from grid peak periods. And so that's sort of the thinking behind this incentive program. We can move to the next 2 slides ahead. Thanks. I talked a bit about customer education. This is a challenge, whether it's station operators, so developers that are moving, say, from like the energy efficiency space and they want to move into EV charging, or fleets that want to electrify, or just commercial station developers. And they don't have necessarily a natural intuition or understanding of what their electrical costs may look like. And also, we have a few different rate options for our commercial customers. And for them, it can be a challenge to understand, how do I choose the best rate for me? If these operating costs are a challenge, clearly that rate choice is going to be a factor. And so we developed this cost calculator. It provides a projected estimated bill, and the user can come in as a station developer or as a fleet. They can choose their configuration, how many chargers they have, how much charging they expect to happen at them. If they're a fleet, they can pick their vehicles, the different charging configurations, and it'll give the user a sense of what those costs may look like and how to best configure their chargers and their rate selection to minimize their costs. We can move 2 slides ahead. So finally, what's next? I did mention that the governor ordered the Public Service Commission to expand this infrastructure incentive program, the Make Ready program, to medium and heavy duty vehicles. And that's going to look very different. There, you're focusing primarily on fleets rather than as many personal vehicles. And what you find is really, to reach the policy targets that I talked about, those greenhouse gas reduction goals, you really do need to address the medium heavy duty sector. You can see the graphic on the left here shows megatons of carbon per vehicle. And you can see just how much it varies, whether you go from electric bus to heavy and medium duty vehicles down to just battery electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. And what that means is, even with fewer miles traveled by these vehicles across our area, they still account for 15% of the greenhouse gas emissions, and of course also emit other particulates that can really affect the health of the people living and working in the areas that they operate. And you can see that on the right, there really is a very strong correlation across the city, is what we show here, between where these medium and heavy duty commercial fleets operate. Those are the blue dots. and the purple shows the state DEC environmental justice areas. So, you know, looking ahead, we really are looking forward to expanding to medium and heavy duty, just because of the real impact you can have on the greenhouse gas reductions, on the health of people living near those vehicles, as well as in general, bringing more benefits of transportation electrification to disadvantaged communities. And I will wrap it up here. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Britt. All right. Thank you to all the presenters. That was a lot of information to take in. And to address any questions, we're going to start the Q&A session of this forum. So if anyone has any questions, I remind you to enter them in the chat and I'll read them. I think I'll start chronologically, so I'll go back up to
Harris,
some questions. Yeah.
Harris, there's an echo coming from you.
Oh, okay. Hold on one second.
I think it was coming from Britt's computer.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there was an echo out there.
Britt's muted now.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Did Lucy get on her plane, on the flight? Is she gone?
She's on her phone now, so I'm taking over as host. Yep.
All right.
Okay. So there's some questions asked in the beginning. I believe these are going to be for you, Mark.
Yep.
So first one's from Tom. How many of the new chargers will be CCS, not Tesla?
All of our hubs have CCS, and our initial ones are CCS. They're two cable CCS in Chatamo, and then Tesla could use the Chatamo with an adapter. As we move on, we're going to have more CCS than Chatamo, because Chatamo's pretty much just a Nissan, excuse me, at this time, and Tesla's developing an adapter for the CCS.
Okay, gotcha. Les is asking, she pulled this from the DOT website, and we're wondering if you can shine some light on it. So the cost of charging will be competitive with the cost of gasoline for non-EVs. She says, so if the gas pricing goes through the roof as it is now, EVs get hit up as if they're gas powered. Is that really enticement?
That is not what we're doing. You know, when that sentence got written, you know, gasoline was like $2.80 a gallon, and we were struggling to figure out how to price ourselves to stay below those kind of numbers. But as gasoline has spiked, we have not adjusted our rate to charge.
Okay, so it's based around the 280 mark, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I think when we were, as I recall, is when we were developing it.
All right, cool. Tom has another question. He says, do you know whether Electrify America has plans to install fast chargers?
They have 2 sites in Queens, the Queens Mall, and somewhere else. But if you go on the Electrify America website, they show them, and I know they have other sites in Nassau and Westchester, not in the city. I know they're looking at other sites in the city, but.
Okay, gotcha. And we have one last one for you for now. Let's see, I guess I'll combine these two. Are cities' current curbside chargers level 2, or are they the fast charge DC? And John asked, are the bottlenecks more about finding locations with enough electric power available, or finding available real estate?
Well, we'll start with the curbside are level 2. And in terms of the process we went through, I mean, we're fortunate enough coming from DOT to have a bunch of parking garages and fields. And then it was a matter of of working with Con Edison to, you know, kind of start with the lower hanging fruit of ones that where power could be brought without too much hassle. So it's, you know, in our case, you know, we have some existing real estate. Is all of this real estate optimal based on traffic configurations? We're trying to pick, you know, the best ones. But I would say for everyone else looking to develop, and I'm sure Tobias can weigh in on this, real estate is a big challenge here in New York City. So.
Great. All right. Thank you, Mark. So this one, I believe, is kind of directed towards Tobias. He says, in China, they have interchangeable battery stations. What are your thoughts on having these type of systems implemented, or kind of like a drive-through battery changeout? Is that something Revels is kind of looking into?
We definitely looked at it. I think our opinion is it's not scalable. Basically, you need every single auto OEM to change how they're building their batteries, so they're all interchangeable. But yeah, I just don't think it's realistic when you think about GM has its own battery, Ford has its own battery, Tesla. So they all have to agree on a battery to share. And then what if you get your battery traded for a battery that's 8 years old because that's what someone else had? So I just don't think it's practical, to be totally honest. I know what they're doing in China is one company that's doing it. So as Tesla builds out their own charging stations in the US, there's another company in China called NEO, and they are allowing you to just buy the vehicle and not the battery, and then you pay to use batteries they provide you at these charging stations. It's an interesting model, but it's just not scalable. It's definitely the way it's going is fast charging.
Right. I will say I did read a really interesting article today about GoGo, which is it's kind of like the Revel e-bikes or the Revel scooters.
With mopeds, right?
Yeah. They do with mopeds. That seems like something where it's feasible, where, you know,
yeah,
it's not a 3,000 pound battery.
totally.
Right? It's just, so maybe that's something in
I mean, for the way we do our mopeds, we swap the batteries out. So
right.
It makes sense, but these are things you can pick up with your hand.
Yeah.
It's just a different deal.
And oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just saying, I saw someone just posted the Tesla battery swap. Well, you know, we note that, you know, Tesla did a big fanfare on that a few years ago, and I think built 2 swap stations and never really went beyond that. So,
Tobias, I love the way you guys resolved the issue of demand by creating your own demand with the rideshare services to resolve the chicken and egg quandary. How can we, as if we don't own an EV yet, but we want to start using electrical source, can we call on Revel taxis? Do they circulate everywhere in Manhattan? Are they limited to certain streets? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. So right now our service is south of 72nd Street in Manhattan. We have 50 cars, so we have to start small. So that's why we are in a constrained area, but you can get a ride anywhere within that area. So if you're at 68th Street and you want to go down to the financial district, you can do that and go back as well. We will be expanding that hopefully this year to serve other parts of New York and having more cars out there. So it's a better service, but it works really well right now. It's exactly like Uber and Lyft. You basically download the Revel app. We'll let you off the wait list. Then you just call a car like you'd call Uber and Lyft. But instead of someone showing up in a gas guzzler, it's an all electric, all Tesla fleet right now. And the drivers are employees, not independent contractors too. So they have access to health benefits, paid time off, all of the benefits of being an employee. So not only is it better for the environment, but it's also not gig workers.
Excellent, excellent. So it's from 72nd Street down to the financial district.
Yeah, down all the way to the bottom, and that should be expanding over the next few months. So if you live in Brooklyn, we don't serve that yet, but hopefully that will happen soon. You also get dropped off at airports right now. So if you're in Manhattan and want to go to the airport, take the electric car because it's a nicer experience and it's all electric, and it's cheaper most of the time too than Uber and Lyft.
And can you pick it up at the airport coming back?
Not yet. Again, we just need more cars to be able to do that, but we're working on it.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, we have another question. See, Lucy had asked, what if we set aside some of the parking spots for EVs and NYPD could enforce it as strictly as a street cleaning rules? Then the revenue for the city could be used to build more publicly accessible chargers. I guess that's kind of directed towards Mark. Not.
Well, I'll kind of say what we've done.
Okay.
So far as we did create a whole a new category for an on-street space, which is it's a no standing zone except for electric vehicle charging. And you know, we've put those in with the appropriate signage so that they can be enforced. And I'm not quite clear, you know, about tying it to the alternate side parking. I mean, basically, whatever we do these no standing zones, and whatever the overlying or the overriding parking rule is for that area will also apply to that. So if it's an alternate side space, you know, you can't charge, or you can charge in the space during that time. Like everyone else, you'd be sitting in your car for that 90 minutes and charging, but you would have to move it, you know, when the sweeper came through.
Okay, great. Yeah, that would be, it'd be a short window. I feel like there'd be some work done to make that work.
Harris, I have a question for Britt,
yeah.
if I may.
Sure.
Britt, it sounds like from Tobias's presentation that one of the big problems they're facing in the area of soft cost is the permitting and the zoning and getting a site ready to be able to develop it. What can Con Edison do more to help them expand even more?
Yeah, great question. The site selection is one of the leading challenges. We hear that from a lot of developers for the fast charging hubs, especially. And, you know, on the permitting side, I actually, Tobias, want to catch up with you on that, because some questions about, you know, how that can be improved, especially in terms of like the use categories. But we deal more with the, yeah, we should all talk about it. No, there have been some other potential challenges on sort of the policy side, like local law 97 didn't have clarity on not including EV charging load, and the city actually issued a DOB bulletin. So the city's really made a lot of strides in supporting EV charging. So we'll talk about that together, the three of us. But really with Con Edison, the challenge that we have control over is the grid capacity. And, you know, a lot of folks in other regions think about like, oh, the substation capacity, the feeder upgrades. We have so much load density at this point in the adoption. It's really more about the capacity at the site itself. And, you know, so what can we do about that? This is a little bit new for Con Ed, just to underscore what Tobias said, because it's so true. You can drop an EV charging hub down on the ground in anywhere from, say, I don't know, 6 weeks to 6 months, Tobias, depending on the scope of the project. And typically that kind of load would take a developer 2 to 3 years to build. So, you know, for us to do our grid upgrades today, they can take 18 to 24 months. And that really doesn't meet the needs of the market. And we see that, we understand that. We expect similar challenges when it comes to electric heating. So we're starting to think about different strategies. Some strategies might be to condense the construction timelines. So, you know, construction in New York is complicated. There's a lot of obstructions in the street when it comes to trees and hydrants, and there's some natural challenges, but how can we shrink those construction timelines? And then the second question is, how can we be better in lockstep with developers? And this is going to be even more important with medium and heavy duty, where they want to put in tens of megawatts of charging sometimes and anticipate their load. In some cases, maybe even pre-build so that the site is ready for them or close to ready for them, and sort of find those no regrets investments. And so we're starting to think about sort of evolving our planning processes and making our construction timelines more efficient, because it's a real challenge, and we hear it a lot, and it's just, this is a very different type of load. It's a very high current appliance that can be installed pretty quickly.
Yeah, just to follow on, I mean, we've worked with Con Ed on our first site and worked with them on other new sites, and Con Ed has been great. I think where it's a challenge for us is finding the site where it makes sense to put charging there. And are we okay waiting 24 months to get power? Like, I'm an impatient person, and we just want chargers in the ground tomorrow. So for our first site, the power was sitting there already, and that's why we chose that site. We worked with Con Edison to figure out how much power is available, and it checked what we needed. So that site we built out in 6 weeks. So the power is sitting there, you can get these things done very quickly. But getting the power there is really hard. And then, it's not just Con Ed, there's other, you got to get permits, you got to get approval from different agencies in the city to dig up the road and put in transformers and do whatever's required. It's pretty invasive. So there's a whole list of things that we could work on to shorten and make quicker, so that we can get these charging stations in the ground faster. And it's not just a Con Ed problem, it's a everyone problem, including the developers.
Okay, so Les has a question. She says, if curb chargers are not DC fast chargers, how does this work if you have a limit to the hours and times allowed? And just kind of piggybacking off that, is there a kind of enforcement structure planned to make sure that people aren't hogging charging stations? Is someone monitoring how long a car is parked on the street for?
I'll start, and Britt to jump in. Well, right now, the overriding curb regulation prevails. So, if there's a 4-hour limit, we're trying to limit the charging as well. Now, in terms of the utility of the curbside charging, I think, you start to think about it like your cell phone. You're driving around, you have a spot where there's curbside charging available. You look, you're down to 50%. You can add, in 2 hours, you can add 50 miles back into your range. You may as well do it, because you're there and you're going to be parked for 2 hours. If you are going for what you need as a full charge, you're going to go to a fast charger or someplace where you can, either you're parking like in our lots where we have commuter lots and people use the level 2, and yes, they plug in for 10 to 12 hours there, because what are we going to do? They're dropping their car off as a commuter, and then coming back after work. So there's no way they're going to move it at hour 4. So it's just how we envision that service there. On the curb, there's shorter stays. In most of them, I mean, I believe there's some that are that aren't regulated, or more alternate side style. There is the option, we can charge down the road. If someone is full and they're just sitting there hogging the space, we can assess a charging penalty. And right now it's also being charged time-based, not kilowatt-based. So they keep paying for that charge.
Gotcha.
So there is some flexibility in the billing. And, we would do the same thing with our fast chargers with, if you plugged into it and you disappear for 3 hours, at some point, we haven't set it up yet, but we will be setting up. You'll get a notification on your phone. If you don't move it in 10 minutes, we're going to start charging you X amount a minute.
Thank you.
Okay,
Mark.
cool.
Question, Tobias. You guys just successfully completed a Series B round, raising something like $125 million, I believe. Not long ago, maybe a week or two ago. Congratulations, first of all, on that raise. What is that money destined primarily for New York City super hubs, or are you planning to expand outside? What's the plan?
Yeah, so the most important thing we're doing right now is building charging infrastructure in New York City. We're a New York City born and bred company, and majority of our focus is in New York at this moment. And majority of our focus in New York is charging infrastructure, and then bringing the ride share alongside that charging infrastructure. But it's really first and foremost building as many charging stations as possible over the next few years.
Excellent. Glad to hear that. Thank you.
I also have another kind of question for Tobias as well. You didn't really touch on the scooters all that much, and I still believe that in the future, I mean, if someone just needs to do a trip in New York, scooters are far, far more efficient than someone getting in a full-size car. You guys are still planning on scaling up the ride share element of the scooters. That's still a main component of Revel. You're not necessarily leaving that behind, right?
Yep, we still have the mopeds in New York. Again, that's where we started. They're registered motor electric vehicles, and it is a great way to get around. They're really light. They don't use that much energy. We swap the batteries out on them, but yeah, they're fully electric too. So it's really, Revels dedicated to bringing a full electric transportation suite to a city like New York, where you can get around, whether you need a car or you can take a scooter, but you can get around in an electric way.
I
Okay.
have a question, Harris, if I may. I'm not sure who it would go to, but it's based on the study that the Department of Transportation issued last year, I think third or fourth quarter of last year, where you're projecting 400,000 or the transition from 400,000 vehicles from gasoline to electric. If we were to assume, well, first of all, what is the ideal ratio of level 2 and fast chargers per EV, and then following up to that, based on that ratio, are we on schedule in terms of meeting the infrastructure to the expected growth of the EVs?
Yeah, there are a number of ratios out there, and these calculators use different ratios. You've caught me a little, don't have my facts and figures in front of me. I know, and I've talked with the city of Oslo a bit too about the ratios they're using, since they're more built out than the rest of us.
But what I saw in your study was that it's 10, I think it's 10, one L2 charger for every 10 EVs and one fast charger for every 67 EVs, if I did my math right. But I'm not sure, I just wanted to verify that with you.
Yeah, I can jump in there a bit. Just so one of the more popular tools for determining that ratio, Mark's right, there's like a bunch of different approaches, is National Renewable Energy Labs, NREL, that Tobias talked about. They have a calculator. It only works in a certain regime. It's sort of like in the early adoption regime that we're in now. And the targets under our programs, that was 18,500 level 2 and about 450 DCFC. So there's your ratio. It's almost like 1:40. That was determined with the NREL calculator, but they have since updated their calculator. And I think they're skewing a bit more towards DCFC for our region. When you use their calculator, you can choose like what area
Region,
you're
yeah.
in, if it's urban or not, access to home charging, which means for today's vehicle owners, not the theoretical access. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And I think probably a lot of unknowns at what's the exact right fit. But that it's called EVI Pro Lite, the
Yes.
public version. That's a pretty nice calculator if you want to get a feel for it.
And that slide I put up was actually, I ran it last night as an example of what the latest
Sweet.
EVI
Yeah.
Pro Lite is. You know, and shows, you know, what your assumption options are within the model.
I think also just to add in here, you know, New York is also a unique city and has unique.
Yeah.
It's very unique compared to the rest of America. You know, it's so dense, so few people have off-street charging, so few people have somewhere to charge at work. Like this is not LA, right?
Exactly.
So a lot of the data that these tools and research has used has been early adopters of EVs who have been wealthy people with at-home charging access, or they charge at work. And that's just not what's going to happen if we actually need to electrify New York. And it's our opinion that most of the charging will be done by fast chargers in New York, just because it's what makes the most sense for a dense urban environment. But it'd be interesting to see how it pans out.
And I agree. We definitely will skew more toward fast charging, just because of some of the challenges of really putting a lot of other charging options out there too.
And who wants to wait more than 20 minutes to charge a car, right?
Well, you know, you're going to a movie and it's at a movie theater, you can set it for a 2-hour charge.
Yeah, actually, kind of going off that, Heidi mentioned that there's a lot of big box stores outside of Manhattan. Do we know if are these big supermarkets, big parking lots, and in Brooklyn and Queens, are they looking to install EV chargers in their parking lots?
Yeah, we're seeing interest across the board, and so some interest at malls and grocery stores, auto dealers. Yeah.
All right, good. Yeah, that's definitely a very important resource. It's space that is already there, allotted for cars. It only makes sense that those become charging ports. I kind of had a point to make too. When we think of car infrastructure for the future, you know, obviously how we handle the inevitable increase of EVs is important, but we also have to keep in mind that street design, congestion charging, and parking policies are all part of that conversation as well, because it's important to remember that only 45% of households in New York actually have cars, and in Manhattan that number is only 22%. So it's kind of scary to think that, you know, there's I think there's over 2 million cars registered in New York. So to think, you know, 2030 and beyond, that there's going to be enough space to charge all those cars it's frightening, because, you know, that's just a lot of physical space to dedicate towards charging, whether it's on the street or lots. So not really much of a question there, just something to kind of think about. So yeah, for a truly sustainable city, we need to think about reducing reliance on cars, as well as adopting to EV.
And then I'll just say that, you know, at the City Department of Transportation, that is the reason, you know, electric vehicles were adopted. The interest in the jumping in was at a much slower pace than, say, California, because our primary focus is on reducing single car occupants coming into Manhattan. So there are no incentive, we can't do a Norwegian approach of massive incentives. We don't want to generate a new trip. We're saying where we have to have that trip, we want to switch it from gasoline to electric, but anything we can do to pull people out of cars is the priority of DOT. And expanding bike lanes, mass transit options, microtransit, so EVs sort of down the line, but it's important. And when you get to freight, then it's a number one, because the trucks are going to be here.
I mean, that's something we didn't even touch on was how are EV trucks, where their designated charging ports can be. That's a whole nother conversation.
That is.
And I wish we could go into it. We're a little over time right now, so I'm going to officially kind of wrap up here. Let me pull this up.
Thank you
so
all
as you
very
get,
much.
Yeah.
Appreciate your, it was great stuff.
Yeah, thank you to all the speakers and to all the participants for coming out. This concludes the Green Home Forum, but I do want to just let everyone know we have our next forum coming up in April 13th at 6:30. Resiliency in New York 10 years after Sandy. We're going to be talking to some engineers, some architects about resiliency plans, as that's very important. Yeah, that concludes. So thank you for everyone. I'm going to stick around for a little bit as well. If everyone wants to talk about Green Home stuff, if any of the speakers want to stick around and answer more questions, you're totally welcome to do that as well. But yeah, all right. Thank you, everyone.